I'm always delighted to come and make a presentation when you invite me, but please don't ever again put David Hughes right in front of me. He's too damn good, and competing with him is going to be very difficult. And not only that, but he's laid down quite a challenge for, is a trade liberalization talk really relevant in this world he's described? I'll say, yes, it is, for a variety of reasons. One is, we haven't quite got to the end point of the world you're describing. There still are a lot of barriers out there. And also, there's a lot of competitors. There may be relatively few countries on a global scale who are going to be major food exporters, but there's going to be a lot of competition among those suppliers for premium markets. So you want to make sure that if you're a food supplying country, that you're getting access to those big markets on terms that are at least as favorable as your competitors in other countries. Whoops. I think we have a wonderful opportunity here in the meat and livestock industry with a new conservative government in Canada, a majority government with a 4 or 5 year mandate, and one that is very much committed to opening markets for Canadian business and producers. And I decided to start with last week's throne speech. It's a pretty authoritative statement of the government's direction. And these quotes are straight out of the throne speech. So you couldn't do, and getting space in a throne speech, which is relatively short, is something that's quite a feat. And I don't think I've ever seen a throne speech before with as many references to trade liberalization as are in this particular document. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the broad opportunities on the market access side, and then I'm going to focus in on what I've been asked to do, and that is to talk about our negotiations with the European Union and the opportunities there. Whoops. Now, I think it's important too, the throne speech also talks about the importance of Canada's traditional industries and the government's support for that. Support them as they innovate and grow. So, you know, as producers here, I think these are some of the things you want to think as going forward. You want to hold the government to these commitments over the next few years. There was one thing in the throne speech that I thought worried me a little bit as a board member on the Alberta Livestock and Meat Agency. You know, it starts off very good. We'll continue to stand up for Canadian farmers and industries. But then it says, by defending supply management. I think we're going to have to watch that, and you're going to have to be ready to make sure that you hold public officials in this country accountable for getting the kind of access you need and not letting supply management become a stumbling block to the achievement of those objectives. Now, Canada's free trade agenda. There are a lot of negotiations already underway with respect to priority meat markets. And these negotiations, we're on the threshold of something that's really quite big. Free trade negotiations don't come along all the time. We've got several in train, some others that are contemplated, and these offer opportunities that may not repeat themselves for a decade or more. So now is the time to take advantage of this agenda. It's not going to be sort of there. You can't say, oh, well, let's wait 5 years and then we'll do that. It's happening now. Now is the time you need to be thinking about what it is you need out of those negotiations and advising the governments that you're working with as to what those requirements are. So I'm going to take a little bit of a look at what's been done already, and then where are we going forward with that agenda. I'm not going to say too much about the GATT and the WTO in this presentation. It's clearly still the cornerstone of the trading system of our trade relationships with other countries, but with the door round faltering, I think for the coming years we're going to see much more focus on bilateral and regional trade liberalization. So what's been done? Well, we started on the bilateral agenda with a free trade agreement with the United States. You're all familiar with that. Then we expanded that to, deepened it to make it an agreement with deeper provisions, and also extended the coverage of the free trade area to include Mexico. Since then, we've negotiated 9 other free trade agreements. You can see with whom right there. And we're now negotiating also with Morocco, the Caribbean community, Honduras, and having exploratory talks with Turkey. Now, I would say that's all very useful. Those are potentially commercially valuable agreements, but they're not really of major economic significance to Canada. But looking forward, what's happening? Suddenly we get into a group of countries that are much more significant, represent much bigger markets. The EU, where we are in the course of negotiations, I'll say more about that in a minute. India, Korea, where we've nearly finished negotiations. There are a couple of things that still need to be addressed, and I would certainly urge the government to move forward and complete that agreement quickly, because the European Union agreement with Korea goes into effect on July 1. The US is going to approve their free trade agreement with Korea later this year in Congress. And if we're not in that market on the same terms as American producers and European producers, our producers are going to lose out. And that applies in particular to pork producers and beef producers. The Ukraine, another big opportunity, and of course, we're engaged in another round of discussions with the United States about how to try to improve our access to that market in the face of new barriers that have been thrown up in the guise of security concerns. And then even more in prospect. We're having discussions with Japan, which are well advanced, and we could actually see negotiations with Japan, free trade negotiations launched later this year. And consideration is being given in bilateral discussions and senior official levels and some discussions with the business community about, on a longer term basis, looking at free trade negotiations with China or free trade negotiations with Mercosur. Now, the Canada-EU negotiations. This is a really big opportunity. As David said a few minutes ago, you know, we've got these rapidly growing markets. We're looking at some of those, but the EU market is still a very big market and a very rich market. There's a lot of money there. There's more to being successful in that market than just market access and trade liberalization. But if you don't get into the market in the first place, if you don't bring down the trade barriers, the other considerations that David was talking about in terms of how you build consumer loyalty are not going to come into play. So big opportunity there, and